My name is Paula Dinnerstein, and I'm on the board of Beyond Pesticides. I'm also an attorney, so I'm doing this leveraging the law for health and the environment.
I should point out we just elected her vice president.
We have 4 people on the panel here. I'll introduce them each right before they speak. We do have a translator here who's translating for a few people, and so you might hear that a little bit in the background, but hopefully it won't be annoying, and it will help people be able to understand this workshop. We're going to have everybody speak about 15 minutes each, and please save your questions for the end. We're going to try to have half an hour at the end where you can ask any of the people questions. So I'm going to give you this and this and this. And our first speaker is Caroline Cox. She's one of my fellow board members of the Beyond Pesticides. And she's also the research director at the Center for Environmental Health in Oakland, California. And I'll just turn it over to her.
Thank you all for being here at the very end of the afternoon. I know it's been a long day. So my job is to talk about a recent court victory regarding pest eradication programs here in California. So if you haven't had the opportunity to meet an eradication program yet, what it is, it's when the state or the federal government picks usually an insect or a weed, sometimes something else, and they say, we're going to get rid of it, every last one of them. And typically these are insects or plants that have come from some other country. There's a lot of eradication programs in California, and probably whatever other state you're from, they happen too. They're pretty common. So I wanted to start just by talking about my personal experience, so we could, ground this in true human emotions. So this is Oregon. This is 1986, and this is a gypsy moth eradication program. And that helicopter there is spraying insecticides to kill every last gypsy moth. And it's a little hard to tell from this picture, but it flies like right over your house. I mean, it's not way up in the air, it's like down there. One of the houses that it flew over was my house. And just by coincidence, I know this is a hard picture to see, but it flew over my house as I was giving birth to my youngest daughter. So I know that in war zones all over the world, children are born with helicopters right overhead. I did not expect this to happen in my own home to my own daughter. And she's fine. As long as you consider being a professor of hip hop fine. But really what it boiled down to was an issue of informed consent. And this is really true wherever pesticides are used, right? Very rarely do we get to give our consent. So it's true with eradication programs just like everything else. And I just want to say that overall, the amount of pesticides that are used in eradication programs is small relative to what's used in industrial agriculture. That clearly dwarfs what's used in eradication programs. But the whole point of eradication programs is to support industrial agriculture. That's why they do them. It's just a piece of that whole structure that we live with today. And so the point of fighting eradication programs is to create a different kind of agriculture, one where people who work on farms have a healthy environment, one where my grandson can go pick an apple from the orchard and eat it and not have to worry about it. That's what we're talking about, sustainable agriculture. So I'm going to talk about an eradication program that was in the headlines in California about 10 years ago. And it's this very plain, ordinary moth. It's called the light brown apple moth. It came from Australia. It was, quote, discovered in 2006 in Berkeley because there's a retired professor of entomology who was spending his time looking for moths in his backyard, and he found it. So the eradication mill kicked into action, and they began aerial spraying to eradicate the moth. And they said they would have to spray every month, except in the wintertime, for probably 5 to 7 years in order to accomplish this eradication. There is no recorded event where the apple moth has damaged any crop in California. There wasn't one then, and there hasn't been one since. So people got really upset. And in particular, what they got upset about was that the California Department of Food and Agriculture was incredibly arrogant. They said, "You don't like it? Tough luck." So I just wanted to give a little shout out to Rachel Carson. Some of you may know that she actually wrote Silent Spring because of gypsy moth eradication. Yeah, and so some facts about the apple moth. When they actually started looking around California, they found it in 13 colonies. Entomologists who know what they're doing said it had probably been here for decades. This is a moth that can't really fly. So for it to have spread to 13 counties would take a really long time. When they started the aerial spraying, there were human health effects from the spraying. This is Jack, who was, just a young boy, teenager now, and he developed life-threatening asthma as a result of the spraying, and his parents were just not given the time of day. So there was a huge legal battle, mostly around the California Environmental Quality Act. And the CDFA said, this is an emergency, we don't have to do it. The court said, yes, you do. They went through some efforts, and eventually it ended up in failure, that their CEQA analysis was no good. But one thing that's important is that the apple moth is only one of many eradication programs. This is spraying for Japanese beetle in Sacramento. So in the midst of that legal action, they decided to do another CEQA document that would cover every pesticide and every pest that they ever wanted to do an eradication program in California. And that legal challenge just ended recently with the court ruling that the document was illegal. And the court also said to CDFA, you can't use any more pesticides until you fix this. So it was a major victory. Victories like this, it's been 10 years since the apple moth program. It takes a really strong coalition. This is just a few of the groups that were really involved in making this happen. And I want to give a shout out to someone who's not here. This is Nan Wishner, and although she had a strong coalition, she was like the guiding force. And without her, this victory would have never, ever happened. She, through this 10-year process, never gave up, not once. And it's really impressive. I also want to call out the attorneys who helped So Earth Justice was involved in the first round of lawsuits. Shepard, Muller, Richter, and Hampton and the ATA Law Group were involved in the second round, and all of them did just a tremendous job. Yeah. And so just to go back to what I said before, this is the goal, right? A healthy, sustainable agriculture that's good for us, good for the planet, good for the people who work, good for everybody. To sum it all up, it's maybe a small step, but it is a victory, and it's pushing us in the direction of sustainable pest management. So fewer poisons in the world. That's where we're headed. So thank you.
Our next speaker will be Kim Richman, and some of you saw him this morning. He's an attorney who is using the law to further good causes that we're all interested in. He's the founding member of the Richman Law Group, and his cases address law and policy issues ranging from public health and sustainability, protecting animal rights, and civil liberties. He also focuses on keeping our food systems unadulterated, protecting our privacy online, and defending our environment. So he's going to tell you a little bit about his work and how he's using the law to further the causes that we all care about.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I spoke with many of you this morning, so I wanted to frankly talk about specific cases and how we could perhaps use those to illustrate some of the tactics. I think you have the wrong PowerPoint. If you could just switch that over, that would be great. And so there are two types of cases I want to talk about, which are cases that we bring downstream, which I alluded to this morning to some extent regarding the Nature Valley granola bar case, in which they purport to be all natural, but then indeed contain levels of glyphosate. And so that traditionally has been the type of work we've been doing in terms of addressing our adulterated food systems. And I have targeted single source contaminants from trans fat to GMOs to synthetic ingredients to now glyphosate. And I'll talk also about how it's actually become multi-dimensional in terms of the number of contaminants. And so I think that you have the old slide from this morning, so I'll just continue describing the type of work that we've been up to. Going upstream, we have now brought a direct case against Monsanto, and this is with regards to their Roundup product. Now, many of you may have heard, thanks to Carrie Gillum, about the work that's going on at San Francisco Federal Court regarding the multi-district litigation around Roundup and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, that's a mass tort case which they focus on personal injury, and they are right now in the midst of trying to have their scientists establish that there is indeed general causation between the exposure to glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There has been an emergence of science since then with regards to fatty liver disease, kidney failure. The list seems to keep getting longer and longer. So those studies will emerge and hopefully become more and more established over time. And as I alluded to this morning, we have been using truth in advertising to get in front of a lot of these issues in order to not get too bogged down in terms of a battle of the scientists, not get too bogged down with personal injury claims and the like. But what we're talking about is really economic injury to some extent, that they are charging a premium for purporting to be, in this case with the Roundup product, the statement that we're targeting, and the one and only statement that we're hanging our hat on, is where they say kills plant enzymes not found in humans or pets. So many of you may be familiar with the statement, and many of you may also be familiar with the fact that that is not true. That in fact, as we learn more about our biome and our system, we do in fact have a lot of those same enzymes in our gut, and that the mere presence of these enzymes, I think, is our way of threading the needle. Now, it's not direct, it's not addressing these larger public health concerns, environmental concerns that we are facing today, However, it is a very effective tool, so much so that we recently have made it pass not one motion to dismiss, but 2 motions to dismiss. And so this is a direct action that we have brought on behalf of Beyond Pesticides and the Organic Consumer Association in DC, in which now has amended their consumer protection statute to give straight statutory standing to nonprofits. And it's an exciting time. It's unique in that there's really no other consumer protection statute like that in the country. California was like that a long time ago, no longer. And so we, in fact, were removed from Superior Court to federal court in DC and had our case transferred to a Trump appointee. And so we're basically holding our breath. But lo and behold, a couple weeks ago, we made it past the motion to dismiss. We'll get a formal decision within 30 days. We were shocked. So we also have been using consumer protection class action suits to put even more pressure. So we have the consumer watchdog suit that's on behalf of the general public, primarily in DC, and then we have the consumer protection suit that is pending in Wisconsin federal court that's on behalf of consumers. Same theory, same actionable statement. And on Friday, in fact, we just got word from the court that we indeed made it past the motion to dismiss, which means now we can push into discovery. And while in the Wisconsin matter we'll have to go through other hoops with regards to class certification, the matter in DC will go straight to trial after some discovery. And so these are, ways in which we are trying to put maximum pressure upon the industry without getting into, again, the science and waiting for the government to do some proper regulation to reassess perhaps what are the acceptable limits. So these efforts are one of many that we have been seeing. I'm sure many of you here in California are familiar with Prop 65 and how in fact they were successful after the World Health Organization has deemed it a probable human carcinogen to eventually get it on the Prop 65 list. And it was it's a hard-fought battle that unfortunately had a minor setback in that the company Monsanto would not be required to put on its Roundup product that it's a probable human carcinogen. Nevertheless, it will remain on the Prop 65 list of probable human carcinogens. And so there are these multitude of efforts that we frankly track and try to in some respects coordinate, and so that we could in fact all pull together. And so everyone here, I'm sure in the room, on one level or another has brought a campaign against Monsanto in their own right. And so if only we can all work together as a village. I think that's ever more powerful, and it's something I want to emphasize further. And so what I also want to talk about is how we have been focusing on how these issues not only address, this is some information with regards to the action that we have in DC, and you see some recent press on that. And this is what I want to next talk about in terms of how these issues are impacting not only our human health, they're impacting our environment, they are impacting animal protection issues, and then as we heard during lunch, are raising more and more what I refer to as food justice issues, labor issues, and the like. A lot of our work has yet to really focus upon the food justice piece. We're hoping to change that and having more and more conversations with organizations such as the Food Chain Workers Alliance to really address these issues, because oftentimes, obviously, the folks on the ground, the laborers that are the ones holding the bag at the end. And so this is something I want to talk about. We have been retained by a number of nonprofits, a lot of animal protection groups, environmental justice groups, and human health groups. And I was talking earlier today about how I'm regarded as a private AG, as a private attorney general. The actions that I bring are private citizens or nonprofits against private companies. And so I know that a lot of us talk about, again, legislative efforts, regulatory efforts, and ways in which we can compel the government or the legislatures to protect ourselves and protect our environment and our children and so forth. But obviously, with this environment, especially now, it's just not happening. And so this is a private right of action. This is direct action against the industry. And this, I've seen time and again, able to really move the needle. And so with regards to trans fat and GMOs, we saw this evolution within the marketplace wherein labels are changing, ingredients are changing, and in ways in which, unfortunately, a lot of state initiatives, let's say in the GMO context, were unsuccessful. But that by taking direct action against the industry, one after the other, you're able to bring about change. And so we have been pushing into factory farming practices. And these are not necessarily just simple animal protection cases like you may perhaps see that PETA brings. Again, this is addressing a broad base of issues. And I'm bringing this up because of the fact that what we're seeing, in fact, are levels of pesticides in conventional meat. And based upon our extensive investigation with the assistance of science consultants and FOIA requests, et cetera, that there is real issues of pesticides popping up in addition to antibiotics, human pharmaceuticals, heavy metals. But we are seeing, for instance, atrazine. We heard Tyrone Hayes talk during or after lunch, and we in fact have seen levels of atrazine in conventional meat. And now we have, through our investigation, found the presence of these contaminants. However, we have yet to frankly understand the narrative as to why, in fact, these various contaminants are popping up. We have a whole host of theories, from the water to the feed to the air. The list goes on. I think that the answer in the end of the day will be all of the above. But right now, what we have found in a lot of conventional meat that claims to be, again, all natural, antibiotic-free, a whole host of contaminants. And we're able to address this. And it's also important to note that the contaminants that we're finding are parts per million, parts per billion, do not necessarily violate any existing federal regulation, right? These antiquated regs, and are also subject to a lot of special interest, and is just not really reflective of where we are in terms of our understanding, right? We heard a lot of lectures about how it's really not necessarily the dose, that in fact sometimes the smaller the dose, the more harmful it is. So lo and behold, here we have information where we found contaminants in the parts per million, particularly concerning dozens and dozens in conventional meat. And so what's exciting now, and we've been getting a lot of success here as well as a lot of pushback, is that yes, these nonprofits can now step into the shoes, right, of these antiquated, federal agencies and make change. And so we have, what I love is that in some respects this kind of emphasis on the environment and animal protection and on human health, each of the different organizations reflect those issues. And so we have the Organic Consumers Association, in which really represents a lot of human health issues. I see Patrick here in the audience from OCA, so big shout out to him. And so with regards to their role, they are effectively acting as almost like a mini USDA of sorts. We have then also Friends of the Earth, right? And a lot of the folks in this room, I'm sure, are familiar with FOE's work. And they are now, in essence, acting as a mini EPA and addressing a lot of the environmental impact upon on the local environment. And then, of course, Center for Food Safety is acting as almost like a mini FDA in addressing these issues. And so we have been successful from California to Washington, D.C. We've brought cases against companies such as Hormel and Sanderson Farms and Diesel Turkey Ranch, and have been, frankly, experiencing a tremendous amount of pushback. And so folks, I think, understand, right, thanks to Oprah and Pink Slime, the kind of pushback the meat industry engages in. It is real, and it's almost the rule with every one of these cases, not the exception. And so, but nevertheless, we've been successfully making it past various motions to dismiss, We've been, yes, frankly, hit with threats of sanctions, which we've ultimately prevailed against, and also other attempts to target our consultants, which we've also have been successful in beating back on. And so now we hopefully will get to the point in which we actually, learn as to why these contaminants are within the conventional meat system. As I think many of us know, when you're operating a CAFO, an operation of that scale, you have really no other choice but to, frankly, pump the animals with a whole host of antibiotics, growth hormones, and the like. And so, but we have in fact seen indication of atrazine, which is particularly disturbing, especially after what we learned today in its smallest dose. And so oftentimes you hear, well, what's the big deal? It's low levels. And meanwhile, the amount of meat that average Americans are eating and the bioaccumulative effect is quite disturbing. And so just to conclude, I hope that folks really consider, where we are in history right now, right? Where it's really a matter of us, taking up arms and taking action against industry directly if the government is going to fail us. So I look forward to questions, and we'll continue the conversation.
Advisor to Grace Communications Foundation. She's won several awards for investigative journalism and communications. She's participated in a number of public debates on food systems, testified to Congress and other agencies, and she served as a member of the FDA Food Advisory Committee. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pa. Hi, Caroline. It's the first time we've met in person, actually. We've worked together a lot over the years on various issues. So thanks. I'm really happy to be here, and it's been a really great conference. I don't know what you all think, but it's been really great and moving. And I just want to start this by saying I always have this debate as a scientist whether I should get personal, because it's this conflict in a scientist to be personal. And if I'm driven by my own bias, then somehow I'm not being scientific. And so I just want to put that out there as it is indeed a challenge for a lot of scientists out there to be advocates. And I also want to take that opportunity to share something personal, which is that I got into this work also because I was tired of seeing so many people get sick. I did my graduate degree in toxicology and environmental health science. At that point, only smoking was an environmental health risk. And it was at a school of public health, and no talk of agriculture at all, no talk of pesticides. And I went to a Superfund. I did my postdoc at an environmental and occupational health science institute, and I went to a Superfund meeting in Pelham Bay in New York. And so many of these community members were sick, and the EPA was basically there telling them that there was no way there was no correlation. Meanwhile, they had a Superfund site. They had tons of chemicals documented, tested. They had basically done the entire landscape, and all they could tell these folks was, there's no proof. And it killed me. And I thought, oh my God, as a scientist, one that at least likes to talk and understand communication, this didn't seem good enough. And so my interest in communication was sort of started there. And how could I, in some way as a scientist, help people like this who were being told there was nothing wrong and no way to document or hold anyone accountable? What a terrible thing to ruin so many lives. So I made my way over to Consumer Reports eventually, and I spent 17 years there running their sustainable safety and sustainability group. And it was a way for a scientist who liked to talk to be able to call it like I saw it. I didn't have any advertisers. I didn't have anyone telling me what I had to do, what I couldn't do, or how I had to interpret anything. And so I got to spend 17 years calling it like it is on many, many, many different projects. And this is just some of those projects. We did shrimp, we did arsenic in rice and juice, we did caramel color in Pepsi, and Caroline, you and I had done a little bit together on that with the 4-AMI carcinogen. Pesticides, fish, I've tested every meat you can possibly test, hundreds of samples nationwide, because for Consumer Reports we were testing products. And so what was the nation's beef supply? What was the nation's pork supply, not only with regard to safety, but sustainability. And so for me, it was always about being a little bit different and trying to put different connections together, because if you just went the same old way, you were never going to get to something you could prove was a problem. And we wanted change at Consumer Reports. We had advocacy, we had science, there was a way to drive that change through the communication. So here are some learning lessons. I have to stand up, I can't. Okay, so one is, and I think we all know this, that lack of proof of harm is not safe. And that is a tactic that is used by so many to counter arguments that something is safe. You can't prove it's harmful. We didn't see it's harmful. Monsanto owns all the chemicals and all the GE technology it owns. We can't test it unless we get permission from them. It is proprietary in order to test. So not being able to prove harm is a little bit of a hardy har-har. And really the burden of proof is on the company, right? To prove it's safe before that gets out onto the market. Instead, the entire thing has become inverted, where we are the guinea pigs, we are the ones who have to prove burden of harm. It's lopsided. We've spent a whole day hearing about how it's probably harmful. And so it's really atrocious that we've gotten to this point. Now we know 80,000 chemicals are on the market without adequate safety testing. We know that anyone can put a new food ingredient in food and not tell the FDA, not really test it that much. They can decide that it is safe, and they are doing that. And as Kim alluded to, there's a lot of companies out there with a lot of new food ingredients, and they're pretty strange and remarkable. The pre-market safety approval of meat is determined, but the standards and other bacteria mean that meat can be sold with salmonella legally. Meat can be sold with E. coli legally. Not the E. coli 157, but they have to test for it and find it in order for that to be illegal. So there's lots of gaps out there in our regulations, in our standards, that made great fodder for being at Consumer Reports and running investigation after. There was no end to the investigations we could run. One just side note, we did a lot of risk assessments too. I'm going to take you through the arsenic risk assessment that we did. Arsenic is a pesticide that's been used for a really long time and is still being used, unfortunately. And cancer risk is based on a 70 to 80 year exposure. Anybody in this room know someone who's gotten cancer in less than 70 or 80 years? Honestly, I mean, they upped it from 70 to 80 years. It is nonsense. And so if you don't reach a level where that daily level every single day for 80 years isn't going to happen, it's fine. It's below a level that the government would consider harmful. That is generally in the layway how they're setting these standards. That's crazy. And we're setting kids up, as Raoult mentioned this morning, for complete disaster, especially when kids, and I'm going to take you through this, get exposures to big carcinogens early on in life. So these are just a couple of the things, risks we've talked about today based on signal exposures, not aggregates. If you look at the data that Kim has, there are so many chemicals and pesticides and drugs and antibiotics in our food system that it's not just about pesticides, it's this whole group. There are 450 drugs approved for animal production in this country. So the fact that we might get rid of one or two doesn't deal with the iceberg that's on top of it. So I'm going to quickly get into, someone has already been through this today, which is that we are not using modern toxicology when making regulations and settings for safety. And we've talked about cancer, we've heard about endocrine disruption today, so I don't want to get on this too much except to say where there are these little, I don't know what they are, laser lightning bolts, is where industry tries to wedge in. And so in this one, this is, the dose, it used to be the linear dose response curve, right? The more the dose, the more the response, the more the poison, the dose that makes a poison. We know that's untrue. We know hormones act in a more monotonic, in U shape, where low levels actually cause a response. And then there may be another peak of response. There can even be another one and another one. So we already know that these models here are not the only explanations. They are one. But where industry gets in and wedges in is right here to say, that's too low of a dose. So it's too low of a dose, it doesn't matter. And the way you look at dose is not looking at just what's in a product, but how much of that product is somebody consuming on a daily basis. And in California here, Prop 65 requires you to do both. And that's why people like Caroline have been working on those things. And when we did the caramel color in soda, and I'm not getting into it, it came down to, do people really drink a can of soda a day? And that when we came out with the levels of 4-MEI in soda. And so we as scientists had to go back and do this crazy study to prove that people drink at least a can a day, if not 2 cans a day. But there wasn't science out there. So Pepsi was trying to use that as a way to wriggle their way out of the lawsuit here in California on Prop 65. Okay, the next one is on cancer. So cancer, there is no safe dose of a carcinogen. And if somebody tells you otherwise, they are not correct. That is the exception. It is the exception. It is the exception. It is not the rule. And they've been trying to do it to arsenic, the pesticide industry, and that's how they've kept arsenic pesticides on the market, by claiming there must be a threshold. It's too low, you're not going to get cancer. It isn't true. There isn't one of these thresholds, and there's been a lot of political maneuvering to chuck the safety assessment of arsenic out of EPA and start it all over again. So what took 7 and 10 years is starting all over again, and it's incredibly painful as a toxicologist to see that when we know the harm already, and this is just a political game. Risks. I can't get it done in 5 minutes. So risks will run from acute to chronic, and it's obviously, if it kills you, it's easier to prove. So my counterpart at CR used to do mechanical and engineering hazards, and I'd always say, Don, you've got the easiest job, because if it kills you, you can tell people that, and people respond, and we can make market change happen like that. If a baby stroller takes a finger off, you can change that baby stroller within the next year. And yet, today we see these pictures of babies with birth defects. So if someone severed their limb off, there's no market change. There's no market change at all, because it's harder to track and it's harder to prove. And so what do we need to do to start pushing these connections together? It isn't going to be the sort of way we've been doing it the whole time. So you need a clear explanation of the solution, and it's how we've approached things. You need clear messaging. I'm going into case studies now. Here we go. So arsenic in your food, it's in rice, it's in apple juice. We were feeding it to chickens, and it's used as a pesticide. That's why we wanted to look at it. We looked at FDA's total diet study, and we saw all this arsenic all over the place. And that was before we even decided to take it on as a project. Then we looked at the lifetime cancer risk. If you look at this bar, that's arsenic compared to every other carcinogen in water and the risk we accept, because arsenic is so potent and we cannot in every case get it down. So there were no standards in food. And the mantra of the FDA was, there is no problem. Arsenic is fine in food. It is completely safe. So that was the climate we were going into when we ran these studies. And you can imagine how we were received by the agencies, who, by the way, we went and briefed every single time we did these before we even went out, so that we could, again, help manage that message as it went out. Those face-to-face conversations, even with your foes, with your challengers, incredibly important to sit down at the table. It reduces the amount of junk science accusations that are thrown around afterwards. We also did a lot of testing of these foods for arsenic. We did a full risk assessment and got to serving sizes that shouldn't be exceeded, so that you could at least stay within a safer range. It wasn't going to be safe, but at least safer. And that would be a leverage to get the industry to start moving to deal with the problem. And that's what's eventually happened. I'm not going to go into this, and this is about risk. We never want to get to an excess of one cancer in 1 million people. That's the goal of safety. That's where the safety line is drawn. And if you look at arsenic, for an Asian person who's consuming a lot of rice a day, they can get up to the 1 in 100, which is what this top line is for the highest level of consumption. And all this is to say the risks are way higher than what's acceptable, way like 10 log times higher than what's acceptable. So you would think we would have taken some action. We would stop the use of arsenical pesticides. We would stop feeding chickens arsenic, but it took about 5-6 years and decades and lots of groups working on it to finally get the FDA to set an action level in juice, to finally, we worked with the American Academy of Pediatrics. They put out advice that infants should diversify their diets, because rice is, of course, what we feed infants. And that's why I was saying before, we don't want to start them off on this terrible slope of being exposed to tons of carcinogen initially. We have gotten no traction with the EPA, and that pesticide industry is very, very powerful. They call themselves Friends of MMSA, which is the pesticide. And that's the group, and they write often to the agencies to let them know that their stuff is really good and not to take it off the market. So cotton, sod, and rights of ways, which is everywhere, can all still be sprayed in arsenic. Okay, quickly, proving differences in safety. So this is beef. I'm taking you now to a different road. When we look at sustainable versus non-sustainable, the conventional samples, you get less E. coli, you get less Staph aureus. We couldn't really believe that one. So this is ground beef in the country, looking at conventional versus more sustainably produced and finding differences in safety. And to be honest, it's some of the proudest work I've done, because it really starts to put a scientific anchor to what we all know is right, but we can't prove it. So let's prove it. And so we took this to the USDA as well. I want to talk now a little bit about antibiotics. And so antibiotics are another pesticide, right? They kill a bacteria, they kill a pest. We use them interchangeably often. And so I just want to talk about meat for a minute. And there is a narrative out there on antibiotics, right? And everyone's taken the pledge to stop the use of human antibiotics. Great, Wendy's, McDonald's, everybody. The problem with that is that the sales numbers for antibiotics aren't changing much with all the pledges, right? What the real problem is that we are not addressing the root causes of why we're using these antibiotics in the first place. So as Kim was mentioning, in these big confined animal operations, you can't just pull antibiotics out and hope for the best. You're likely going to have higher mortality, more sick animals. You must implement hygiene. You must give them space. You must manage their poop. If you don't manage their poop, you're going to end up in a big pathogenic hell. And guess what? That's what we're in. And the World Health Organization calls it a public health crisis because our antibiotics aren't working anymore, just like the pesticides. That notion of resistance is not unique to pesticides. It runs in antibiotics as well, and that's an even bigger problem for us because it means we don't get treated as well when we want to. These are the labels on the other side, and where we drew our sample pool, by the way, was right here at this line where USDA standard is no antibiotics, not prophylactic, not human, which is FDA's current guidance and where a lot of those fast food pledges are coming in. And raised without antibiotics goes a little bit more to get to animal antibiotics. But these guys do not deal with any of these practices. So when we did our sample pool, we segmented between these ones here that met the USDA and these ones here. And here's what we saw. In the multi-drug resistance of the bacteria, so these are the superbugs, in the conventional samples, 18% were contaminated with it. When you took all of our more sustainably produced, including that lower one, 9% was half. But when we just pulled out grass-fed, which is at the top of that, organic grass-fed, it was 3 times lower than the conventional. Again, trying to document the more sustainable we are, the safer the system gets. We were able to get an op-ed in the New York Times about that. My biggest proud moment is the New York Times actually wrote, conventionally raised cows had more of some kinds of bacteria than samples from cows that spent most of their lives in a pasture. Yay. Because when we can get the news to start saying things like this, we can start to change the narrative and what it is out there. Okay, don't hate me. I'm working on this now, and it's pasture-based system, and what is truthful grass-fed? The USDA actually has a grass-fed standard that does not equal what grass-fed ought to mean. And so you're going to see a ton of claims out there that claim grass-fed that have nothing to do with pesticides, they have nothing to do with antibiotics, they have nothing to do with hormones, and they could be confined. So these are the labels you want to look for to get a grass-fed product that truly was not fed grain, it was 100% grass, they got pasture whenever, they did not get routine drugs, they did not get extensive supplements, they got pasture without fertilizers, industrial fertilizers and pesticides. These are the ones that get you there, not anyone that just makes that claim. We've built a consensus around this with a number of different stakeholders and companies, Organic Valley, Maple Hill Creamery, and we're trying to put together a market consortium that can put pressure on the market itself and tell the crappy guys to get out of the market because there's so many others that are actually doing a good job. And showing that kind of viability in the market is also really important. So when you're working on your problem, identify that solution and marry that message together because that people need to hear that. You can't just hear the bad news unless you hear how you can do something about it. And that's kind of why we're all here, right? Okay, so these are labels that help you and get you there. These slides will be posted so you'll have it all. These are the labels where you start to go down the slippery slope. No nitrates does not mean no nitrates. And so go, anyway, all right. So you want to avoid these. Certified claims with standards are the ones that get you. And this is my last slide, which is my son who, this is 2 years ago now, but As a mother who's a toxicologist, they know to call Rice Krispie treats arsenic treats. I teach them a lot of things and don't let them eat certain things. But this really got me when and I had my best friend from high school passed away of pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. He was an amazing doctor here in California. He went to UC Irvine Medical School. And you know, we'll never know why, right? And we know from a public health perspective, certain things cause cancer, but you will never be able to tell someone their cancer was caused by an environmental exposure. And that just kind of kills me. And my son watched my friend die over 18 months. And then my other best friend from college just had her uterus ripped out at 49 years old for endometrial cancer. So my kids see a lot of it with our friends and what's going on. So can we play this? Can you play this video?
What does it mean to you to eat healthy?
To eat healthy is good to me because I don't want to get cancer. I really don't.
And that was a clip they did about their food program in their school and the Wellness in the School program, which is in New York and amazing and does great things with the food and not getting it so processed and doing gardens. And they interviewed the kids at my son's school, and my son was interviewed for the piece. So anyway, thank you.
So last but not least, we have Valerie Gorospe. I hope I'm right. All right. And she's a community organizer in Durango, California, and has been with the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment since 2009. Valerie is the proud daughter of Teresa Leanda, passionate and fearless advocate for California farmers and rural families threatened by pesticide exposure. Valerie is continuing her mother's legacy of working with issues in the San Joaquin Valley and regarding the residents' exposure to pesticides.
Hi, so last speaker, no pressure, I feel like I should stand up. So, yeah, just going with everyone's information that you shared, thank you so much. It is personal for me. I grew up in Early Mart. It's maybe 4 hours or so from here. 4 hours north in the San Joaquin Valley in Tulare County. And, you know, the bio or the intro, my mom was Teresa Leanda. She was a advocate for pesticide safety and for Californians for pesticide reform for a very long time. And so that was her job, but it was very personal for her too, because in 1999 in Early Mart we had a really bad drift exposure on our street on Lane Road. And as a result of that accident, my mom just threw herself into this isn't right, you know, this attitude, this plight of her advocacy that this isn't okay for people to be sick because of someone's mistake, because of poisons that are allowed to be applied in our homes. And so where we grew up, my grandpa, Pantaleon Ancheta, was from the Laog City, Locos Norte, the Philippines. And he came to the United States, like most folks, to build a family here, build a life here, because there was a lot of opportunities here. And so he built a house in the early 60s, and that's where my mom grew up, and that's where I grew up, and that's where my other siblings and my own kids still spend a lot of time. And when I grew up and when my mom grew up, we had grape fields that, well, let's say we're here at the wall and our chain link fence is where the camera is. So the road that we lived on really, or still, is only narrow enough for one car to pass through. So that's what we grew up with. And it's a very short street. It's not a long street at all. Lane Road, you can Google map it. You turn the corner and there's more agriculture. So there's grape fields when my mom grew up and when I grew up, and then more grape fields over here. And now when you go, there's almond trees. So they ripped out a big trend in California, ripping out a lot of the crops and planting almond trees. And so the almond trees that exist now still use the same amount of pesticides that the grapes used when my mom grew up and when I grew up. And so going back to why it is personal and the cancer that our families grow up around, it's common. It's something that the conversations are the planning around how we're getting a community member, a family member to their chemo treatments. It's not a big shock anymore that someone is being diagnosed with different things. On the corner of my very short, my Nana, my maternal grandma, her sister, their family in that one household was prostate cancer, reproductive cancer, juvenile diabetes, and my cousin, who would make an amazing mom, has never been able to have children. And they grew up in the same home. Right next door, thyroid cancer. And then on my grandpa's lot were 3 cases of prostate cancer, autism, liver cancer, and right next door, Jane Anita, breast cancer, lung cancer. And those are just the cancers. That's not in our own home. My brother's autistic, our chronic bloody noses, our chronic migraines and headaches, the asthma, the skin disorders. These are just everyday things. And so, yes, our work is personal. So where am I going with this? I'm not trying to overindulge you with so much, so many private details. But it's just our reality. It's where we live, and it's what we go through. And so the theme of this workshop is leveraging the law, right, for health and environment. And so some of the challenges that we've had in Kern County, and if you haven't heard of Kern County, Google us. We're #1 for so many things. We are #1. The Guardian did a report in 2015 on Kern County on the police brutality and our sheriff's department of how many deadly cases and brutal cases we've had. So we're #1 there. And just last week, our Kern County sheriff was quoted saying that it's cheaper, it's better financially to kill someone than it is to injure someone. So we're #1 there in that area. We're also #1 in air pollution. Kern County, our region by the American Lung Association, the State of Air Report always comes out. Our region is usually in the top 5 for air pollution, and a lot of things, not just our geographics, but a lot of our sources of pollution, including pesticides, can contribute to that air pollution for us being #1. We're also #1 for, maybe not #1, maybe in the top 3 in our valley and in California for the teen pregnancy rate. We are also #1 as far as education, as like college degrees. And then we're #1 also, or in the top 2 for our asthma rates that we have. And then this past year, Kern County, a few months ago, the report came out that we're #1, finally, for the very first time, for our crop value. Our crop value in Kern County is almost at $8 billion. Billion with a B. And that $8 billion comes at the cost of low wages for farm workers, heat illnesses, heat deaths for farm workers, and so many other things, of course, like pesticide drift. Pesticide drift for our farm workers and our families, like where I grew up, is a normal thing. And like Letty mentioned earlier, during the lunch panel, it's normalized. And it's I don't even want to say it's sad. It's the reality. That's we've got folks that won't report that they are being drifted on by pesticides because of their documentation status, because of the administration, the federal administration that we have, because of the policies that are put in place. So, you know, the two big accidents that we had, the two drift incidents that we had, May 5th and August 2nd, you know, people were made very, very sick by fumigants, but they're not reported. You know, when hazmat comes in and when the decontamination process came in to start for the farm workers that were exposed by pesticides that weren't even on their fields. These were accidents that happened on nearby fields. These were incidents, this exposure happened, one of them happened at like 2 or 3 in the morning. Folks got to work at 7 o'clock and started feeling sick. So this was hours before, and that made folks sick. So if this is making folks sick, adults, what is this doing to our kids in Lamont, in Arvin, that are adjacent, simply separated by a chain link fence with fields? Mountain View Middle School in Lamont. We, you know, talking about all of the labeling, when there's a very narrow street, almost like the one where I grew up on, and the one field, one side says that it's organic, and mind you, it's a very narrow street. The other field where Lamont Mountain View Middle School is, has a field that uses regular pesticides. And so I question, you know, those grapes are going to be labeled as organic. Those bags, those labels say organic, but they're right next door, so close in proximity to these fields that are sprayed with pesticides. So I've got 5 minutes. So I'm going to go through these challenges that we have in Kern County. So I give you a picture of what Kern County looks like. So one of those challenges was Talone, and the scientific name for Talone.
Dichloropropene.
Say it louder.
Dichloropropene.
Okay, so Talone, we'll call it Talone right now. What was in system, we had a system that was put in place, or not put in place, but there was a system where growers could bank Talone and their use of Talone. So if you remember the AT&T rollover minutes, or was it singular? Okay, so the rollover minutes, what you don't use in 1 month, you use into the next month. Well, the same system existed for Talone. So whatever grower, so they were allowed 90,000 pounds of Talone, a fumigant, a known carcinogen. If they didn't use those 90,000 pounds, or whatever they didn't use of those 90,000 pounds, could be rolled over into the next year, added to their yearly 90,000. So we kept pushing, we kept urging, okay, we want to ban the system. We want to end the banking system. We don't want to have this banking system of Talone anymore. And so what did they do? What did DPR decide to do after we had DPR scientists, we had DPR folks in South Kern, met with Lamont, met with Arvin? Okay, we'll stop the banking system, but we're going to raise the cap. We're going to raise the cap. So that is, so for the attorneys and for the legal folks in here, think about like what we're asking for. What do we want, and what are the possible outcomes, and what can we do with this system that we have in place, like DPR? Another challenge that I've seen is the fertilizers. Fertilizers are not considered pesticides, but fertilizers have made so many people sick, and when we make reports, they can't do anything because it's not considered a pesticide. So where I'm employed, where I work, is the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. It was founded by Luke Cole, and Luke Cole had this belief that you couldn't have these environmental justice community is working with just a lawyer, this white lawyer coming in to save the day. You know, this lawyer coming into this people of color community or the community of color, and okay, I'm the lawyer, I'm going to save the day. No, you've got to have community organizing. And so Lupe Martinez and Luke Cole really believed in this, and that's what we go by. You can't do community organizing without the legal work, and you can't do the legal work without the community organizing, and it's got to be from the people. And so the people in the communities that are living these environmental injustices are the ones that have really got to be the warriors, the fighters, the ones leading the ones leading the fight. And so, like in my community of Early Mart, like my mom, that's, you know, the attorney can't be the Superman, Wonder Woman in those communities. It's got to be community organizing and attorneys and legal working together with the community. I know my time is limited. I'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you.